I'd like to welcome everyone to the last class on Mishnah and Gittin, at least for this Mishnah Yomit cycle, because Mishnah Yomit is always eternal. And with that, I want to hand things over to Leora.
Okay, Kayla, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your patience. My apologies. It is great to see everyone here again. A little bit bittersweet for me because I've had a really great time doing this year with all of you, but Mishnah Yomit continues and it'll keep continuing and continuing, as Kayla said. So we have a very interesting and I say exciting last batch of mishnayot to discuss today, and finishing up the parak. And so what we're going to do today is just to kind of go over just a little bit of structure and content of what we of these mishnayot, and then I will get into the two issues, one briefly, which is the topic of a forced get or a compelled get, just to clarify those matters a little bit. And then we're going to get into the final matter, the final Mishnah, which discusses legitimate reasons for divorce that the husband initiates. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I wanted to begin. I'm not sure if I actually want to share my screen quite yet or not. But just by going over structurally what is happening in our Mishnayot. So we ended off last week with the fifth Mishnah of the eighth parak, which discusses a scenario in which the get was not written properly, in the sense that there was some sort of factual matter that wasn't right, or something that was written not according to the way it's supposed to. And in that scenario, if the get was given, the divorce then, even if they thought it was valid at the time, if it's inspected and it's found that it's not, then it is not valid. And she essentially has to both divorce the husband that she remarried as a consequence of having this get, and also then have a proper divorce from her initial husband. And any child that was born would be a mamzer. It's very serious issue where she's basically neither here nor there. Then our mishnayot, the batch of mishnayot that we have for this week, continue with that. So the sixth mishnah of the eighth parak. Yeah, actually, I will share my screen just so that we have the mishnayot in front of us. Here we go. Great. Okay. Okay. Wonderful. So the sixth Mishnah continues with this same notion in terms of something being neither here nor there when it comes to the divorce. But rather than talking about the case that we're talking before, we're getting into the territory of Masechet Yevamot. Masechet Yevamot discussing, and we also mentioned Yibum and Chalitza last week, but discussing a situation in which a husband dies, and what happens to his wife or his wives as a consequence of that, if there are no children. And so the sixth Mishnah and the seventh Mishnah of the eighth parak discuss scenarios in which there is essentially various confusion with regard to the status of a woman who seemed to have made the rest of the other wives pater from doing, exempt from doing yibum or chalitza with their collective late husband's brother, and then finding out that actually wasn't, that things were not as it seemed. That seems to be a theme here in general, of things being not as they seemed. And then going forward, all of them needing to both to get divorced from the person they remarried, and also having some sort of divorce, doing chalitza, presumably with the having to do chalitza with their husband's late brother, with their late husband's brother. And then we continue in the ninth Mishnah. No, let's continue in the eighth Mishnah. The eighth Mishnah discusses a mix-up where the sofer, the person writing the get, hands the husband and the wife the wrong document. So we have another mix-up where something isn't as they seemed. In this case, we're talking about a husband who receives the get that the husband does not receive the get. The husband is meant to receive the get from the scribe, from the sofer, in order to give it to his wife. But instead, what he receives is the shovar, or this says shover, the receipt that was written for the woman, for her to give the husband upon receiving her ketubah payment after she gets divorced. So we have what the sofer prepared beforehand, is a get for the husband to give it to the wife, and a receipt for the wife to give to the husband. Those get mixed up, and as a consequence of that, what ends up happening, if they don't notice it, basically the husband gives the wife the get, thinking that the husband, takes the get. The husband, no, see, this is where I got confused. The husband takes the receipt, thinking that he's taking the get, and gives the wife the receipt. The woman gives the wife gives her now ex-husband the get. In that situation, if the wife gets remarried and they realize afterwards what happened, then she would be in another situation where she's really none of the no elements of what happened, what transpired with regard to her divorce would be legitimate. Everything has to go over, be done over again. Rabbi Eliezer says that if it's identified immediately, then you're able to just basically hand it back and switch it around. But we continue in the theme basically of things being not quite as they seem, there being a difference between intention and actual action, and that continues in the 9th Mishnah, where we have a situation in which a husband fully divorces his wife and then stays in an inn with her. So right here, we also have some sort of mismatch between the action and seemingly the intention. And in this situation, Beit Shammai says that it's okay, that it is considered to be legitimate, because we don't have proof that there was actually any type of we don't have proof that there were any sexual relations between them. Beit Hillel says that we assume that they did have relations. And therefore, in that situation, then she would need another get. The reason being that we assume we have a concept in halacha called ein adam osed biato bilat znut, meaning that a person does not, we assume that a Jew does not engage in licentiousness. And therefore, we assume that if the husband did in fact have relations with his wife in this inn, and the reason we know that it was done in this inn was because there were 2 edim. We assume we have proof of 2 edim. We assume that the husband effectively made these edim into edei kiddushin, into betrothal witnesses, and that he actually by through their relations, which is you can betroth a woman in 3 ways, through money, through a document, and through relations. We say that, okay, that was actually what he was doing with that action, and therefore she then needs another get, because they actually assume that they somehow got married again. So a bit of it's perhaps on if you're not familiar with that concept, it seems a little counterintuitive, but that's what we assume is happening in this Mishnah. The second half of the Mishnah discusses another case where where there is also a bit of a gap between what seems to be transpiring, or a lack of clarity between what seems to be transpiring and what is actually transpiring. But here it's with regard to the get itself. Where the get itself, we're talking about a get kereach, which is it's an incomplete get, like it's little to the word for bald. It's a get that is incomplete in the sense of we're talking about what's called a get mekushar. Does anyone know what a get mekushar is? Okay. Kayla, that's a no, or that's my mic's not working?
That's I don't know. Could you clarify?
Perfect. Thank you,
I
Debbie.
think it was either tied in a bunch of places or sewn up. I think it was given to a Kohen.
Yes. Exactly as Debbie's saying. We have a get where, let me see if I can just take this. Okay. I happen to have a piece of paper right here. So in a normal get, what's called a get pashut, and there is the final parak in Bava Batra just discusses this exact, when we're talking about contracts, right? A get doesn't only refer to a document that you use for divorce, but any sort of document. And I'm going over this now just because I think it's interesting to see. So a normal get would be written, a get pashut, a simple get, would be written such that you'd have the document here, again, including the torif and the tofes being the generic part of the get, the torif being the specific information that's specific to the divorce, as we have discussed, and then the edim would sign at the bottom, all on the same page here, and then edim sign at the bottom. When we have what's called a get mekushar, basically, the Gemara tells us that the reason in Bava Batra, that the reason why this get mekushar, this tied get or sewn get came about, and I'll show what it looks like, is that Kohanim had a reputation of being very quick to divorce their wives. They'd get hasty, they'd get angry, and they would be like, okay, this is over, we are done. And so what the process of a get mekushar is that I'll show you. Basically, you would have things written on each line, and this isn't exactly what it looks like, but essentially it's almost, you would fold it almost like you're making like a little accordion and sew it. And you would have basically a line. It would then end up looking like this.
Yeah, I just turned off sharing so everyone can see how you're folding it.
That makes so much sense. Thank you, Kayla. Okay. So you have it looks like it's folded like this, and in each fold, a different line of the get was written, and then the edim would sign on the back, okay? The back of each fold, and it was sewn this way. And so this process takes a long time to write. And because it takes a long time to write, the hope was that by the end of the get writing process, the Kohanim would have, the Kohen in question who wanted to divorce his wife out of some perhaps minor spat would actually, which will actually relate to then that the whole notion of divorcing over a minor spat at the end of when we discuss legitimate reasons for divorce, would hopefully change his mind, cool down, and change his mind. And so when you have a get mekushar, the halacha is that on every single line, basically, of the get, there has to be some sort of signature on the back. And so when you have a fold, let's say, of the get that doesn't have a signature on the back, that's when it's an incomplete get, because it's lacking part of the necessary component of the get mekushar, and that's when you have a get kareach, which is discussed in the 9th Mishnah. So I'm going to share my screen again. Thank you, Kayla. That was a good call. Or Kayla, should you share me? I'll do it.
You should still be able to share your screen.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry, I was clicking the wrong button. Okay. So then the 10th Mishnah simply tells us how to basically fix this get, which is interesting that it is something that can be fixed if the edim are not signed on each line. You can actually bring in people who aren't even kosher for edut, right? Generally speaking, or in this particular case, that's a machloket between Ben Nanas and Rabbi Akiva to add their signature there, and therefore you are able to create the hatama, create the I guess symmetry for each line actually having a signature on it. So it's something that can actually be rectified. So that's what happens in the second half of the 8th parak, which seems to continue in the theme again of. Again, I'm trying to extrapolate a general theme here, but there being some sort of gap between intention and action, or some things that are missing in some way. And we sort of continue with that theme in the beginning of the 9th parak, where we are talking about language, and here is where language becomes very, very important. So we had discussed a couple of weeks ago when you make a conditional on a get, and we also discussed this last week, where you say that you are divorced, and usually this was in terms of time or location, in terms of what the husband does, if he returns or not, if he dies or not, if the woman does something, she'll be divorced or she won't be divorced. So when that thing, or if that thing happens, then she will be divorced. Here we're talking about a different type of condition. We start off where someone divorces his wife and says, "Harayat muteret lechol adam ella leploni." You will be permitted to everyone, every single person to marry, except for one person. And so this is where the concern of Rabbi Eliezer says this is okay, but the concern of the Chachamim is that there's still as we learned early on when we discussed what the purposes of a get is that it's supposed to be the thing that is fully koret beno levena. It is the thing that fully separates between the two of them. And by saying if you are permitted to everyone except for this one person, you're leaving space. You're leaving basically a connection that holds that maintains, that allows for the potential maintenance of the connection between them, and therefore the get is not doing what it's supposed to do. But what he's able to do, if this is just by a word of mouth, and he just says this, is he can just he's able to, then we ask Ketzad Yaseh, meaning how can he rectify this? He takes the get back from her, and then he gives it back to her and says, no, you're actually muteret lechol adam. You are now permitted to every single person, and that works. But if it was in writing, even if he went and that she's permitted to everyone except for one person, then even if he changes his mind immediately and tries to rectify it and erases that line, then it's the get is possible. And we see here that there's a difference between something that's actually written and set in stone, so to speak, in that sense, versus something that's just spoken out loud, and the difference between something that's spoken versus something that's written in terms of the severity. Interestingly, in the second Mishnah, we have a similar case where someone says that the husband says to the wife that you are now, basically when divorcing her, that you are permitted to every single person, except for various relationships that it is impossible to have halachic kiddushin with them, that essentially the institution of halachic marriage, of Jewish marriage, does not work with. And these are people whom she is completely forbidden to. So even if a father and a daughter wanted to get married, there's no institution that would recognize it. It's halakhically impossible. And therefore, it's as if he said nothing, because he's saying you are permitted to marry every single person except someone you can't actually marry. And because of that, it works. However, there's other categories of marriages that are usher, they're considered to be prohibited, but they still go through. So the second half of the Mishnah says that that in that scenario, if that happens, then the get is actually possible, because even though it would be prohibited for her to marry that person, it is still actually halakhically legitimate. And then in the third Mishnah, we
could you explain that again? That last one?
Absolutely. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.
What we have in the first half of the Mishnah are examples of relationships that just halacha does not recognize as a marriage. What we have in the second half, however, are relationships that are not permitted, but are recognized by halacha as kiddushin if they happen. So it's still considered to be something that you shouldn't do. So, for example, and this is an interesting example that they give it, because this is if a widow marries a Kohen Gadol, that's something that you're not supposed to do. But if you do it, it still counts as kiddushin. And same with a grusha and a chalutza, a woman who underwent chalitza, and a woman who's divorced to a Kohen, a stam Kohen. What's interesting is that in those situations, the marriage goes through, even though it's something you're not supposed to do. And so we say that if that's within the get, because it's theoretically a halachic possibility, even though you're not supposed to do it, the get is then possible, because it's as if he had said that because he did essentially say you are permitted to everyone except for this one person, or this one type of person, this category of person, which then leaves some sort of it's not a full severance, because it still leaves the
connection.
Exactly. The connection is not fully severed. What's interesting about the examples given here is that if the woman is like, let's set aside that the woman's a widower, she's a divorcee, and a divorcee can't marry a Kohen Gadol. And if she's, and it's stipulating as if she's a divorcee and she marries a Kohen, but she is a divorcee automatically because that's what the divorce is doing. Like, we have a bit of a, it's interesting that these are the examples given. One understanding of why this is given, it's just the derech of the Mishnah to give us theoretical examples, even if it can't apply here. That's an interesting topic to look into at another point. Interestingly, in the third Mishnah, we are just told, this is, so far we've been really seeing different cases. Sorry, I keep on accidentally clicking, seeing different cases. Here we see, okay, they're just telling us information, which is how we would expect theoretically maybe the entire Masechet to be written, is gufo shel get. This is what the essence of the get is. Harei muteret l'chol adam. You are permitted to every single person. Rabbi Yehuda adds in that you have to say v'dein zehave lichi minai sefer truchin v'geret shvukin v'get pturin l'mahach lehitnasava l'chol gvar de titz bayin. So Rabbi Yehuda adds in that it's not enough to say that you are now allowed to marry anyone. You actually have to specify that this get is the thing that's allowing you to do that, and that's what you say by saying that this will be a scroll of divorce, a letter, basically all language. It's a scroll of divorce, a letter of leave, a bill of dismissal, and you can use it to marry any man that you want to. And we follow the halacha like Rabbi Yehuda. If you guys recall, when whoever was here when we went over the language of a get, it includes all of this language, and then we compare the goof of a get for a woman to the goof of a get shiur, the goof of the basic content of a bill of release for a maidservant. So that's we have the interesting comparison between a married woman and a slave again. And then we're told that there are 3 types of gittin that are pasul, but if you marry with them, then the offspring is actually kosher. Kosher in the sense of not a mamzer. So this is interesting. In the previous parak, we were seeing these really stark cases where if you use this get, then everything is bad. You have to, your offspring are mamzerim, you have to divorce from here and divorce from here. Here we're seeing where things are softened. We're not going to go into that case. Then we have another case of a mix-up where 2 people had Gittin Shavin. So in a case where the husbands and the wives have the exact same names and they mix them up, what you have to do is each has to divorce with each. And so now we just have some fun, this Mishnah introduces some like interesting cases of basically a get, or multiple, either of one get that's used for multiple people or multiple gets that have to be used for one person. So in the first case, if you have these 2 gets that were mixed up, you're not sure which one was for which woman because they both have the same names on them, then each woman has to be divorced with both to cover all your bases. The second case of the Mishnah is one in which 5 men wrote inside wrote the content of the 5 men were basically using the get to divorce, the same get to divorce their wives, but they had all written out the names, their own particular names, and they had adim. And in this situation, it actually does work, assuming that and it has to be given to each woman in succession. But if all the adim were written with regard to each person, but if you just had one tofes, if you just had one general the general content of the get, and you only had one set of, and you had all the adim written at, and sorry, you had the get written over and over and over and over and over again, and then just all the adim underneath at the bottom. The only get that is kosher, the only part that is kosher is the final one that the adim were written with, because we can't be sure who the adim were actually written with. So we see that structure really matters here. We have to be very clear on intention in terms of who the get was actually meant for. And that theme continues in the 6th Mishnah as well, which discusses different if the signatures were written in different languages, meaning if they signed in different languages, some that are left to right and some that are right to left. How do we group them? So similar theme in terms of making sure that our intention is clear. And And then we have another case of spatially looking at the get in terms of if you write it on a second page, or if the two Gittin, basically they start in the middle of one page and then one writes in going in one direction and the other get is going in the other direction and the edim are in the middle, what happens there? Or the opposite case is if they each start writing at the top of the page and then they meet in the middle and then the edim are there. So more spatial scenarios of trying to figure out what's actually happening within the get. So we're really moving into looking at the physicality of the get. We continue similarly in the 8th Mishnah, and then the second half of the 8th Mishnah, we have another case now, which seems to be ostensibly unrelated to the first case, which is talking about the language again. The get is written in one language and signed in another language, which is the topic of a get me'useh. A get me'useh is understood to be a compelled get, okay? So all we see, and this is a huge topic when it comes to agunot, when it comes to men who are sarvanim, men who are refusing to divorce their wives, this is where this topic really comes into play in terms of practicalities today. So we see from this Mishnah, they say very simply that a get me'useh b'Yisrael kasher uvegoyim pasul. A forced get, a compelled get, if it's done by Yisrael, meaning by a Jewish Beit Din, then it's kosher. If you're being compelled by Jews, essentially it's kosher. But with non-Jews, it's not. It's not a legitimate get. But then we say that when it comes to the goyim, when it comes to with Gentiles, if they beat him, if they beat the man who's refusing to give his wife a get and say, do what the Yisrael told you to do what the Jews told you to do, then it is kasher. So it's basically, if the get is forced, but it's being done in the name of the of Jews in that situation, then it is kasher. So what the way that this is understood in the rabbinic literature here, I'm just gonna pause us. I'm gonna stop my share for a minute. The way that this is understood in rabbinic literature is that what's happening, this is a concept that many might be familiar with, is the notion that you're not really forcing a person to get divorced. You're rather compelling them to divorce until to the point that they say that they actually want to get divorced, right? The phrase is kofinoto ad she'amar rotzani, that you're really just showing them that they want to really get divorced. And we also understand that a forced get is really only legitimate if it was according to the deen. According to the deen, in terms of situations in which a husband is obligated to divorce his wife. And so it's a whole question of whether we can, in contemporary times, expand that today or not. And so examples that are, and here I'll just share, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen again now. So I'm bringing in the Mishnah Torah here because the Mishnah Torah says something interesting with regard to what it means to force a person to beat a person until they say that they really want to accept the get. But this translation also brings in helpful examples of scenarios in which the halacha requires a man to divorce his wife. So, for example, if the wife is repulsed by him, or if a man was married to a woman for 10 years without her bearing a child, if it ever comes to practical halacha, Shiloh should be asked, and we're not just going to look here. Or someone who is really bad odor, or has a job where they just smell bad all the time, where we understand that there's a situation in which this marriage is not tenable, this woman can't be married to this man. In that situation, the get can be forced. What I want to look at is that the Rambam here, and this is a so to speak famous notion in the Rambam, so some people might be familiar with it, is that when the man is refusing to divorce his wife, when he's supposed to be divorcing his wife, what's actually happening there is that what the Rambam says is that his choice not to divorce his wife isn't actually the choice. And by by forcing him to divorce his wife, you're actually having him see the light. The way he describes it is aval misha takfo yitzro hara levatel mitzvah lasot avera. So it's not that he chose to not do a mitzvah or to do an avera, but it's rather that his yitzer hara took over him. His evil inclination took over him. It wasn't actually him. So it's the language that Rambam uses is hu anas atzmo b'dato hara'a, that he was overtaken with this bad idea. So it's actually what is being done against his will is him doing the wrong thing. Lefichach zeh she'eino rotzeh legaresh me'achar shehu rotzeh liyot miYisrael v'rotzehu la'asot kol hamitzvot ולהתרחק מן העבירות, ויצרו הוא שתוקפו, וכיוון שהוכה עד שתשש יצרו ואמר רוצני, כבר גירש לרצונו. So the Rambam explains is that a person really, in essence, we believe that a person really does want to do the right thing. A person wants to fulfill the mitzvot. A person wants to divorce their wife when they're supposed to. And therefore, what you're doing when you're forcing this person, when you're beating this person in order to get them to say, okay, I will divorce my wife, you're beating the Yetzer Hara out of them. And essentially they are actually you end up uncovering their own will through that action. Very complicated topic. I'm not advocating for anything here. What is interesting is that historically we still try to now like avoid there are efforts to avoid a get musa, a compelled get. But the poskim throughout centuries have developed processes for incentivizing a man to divorce his wife if he is refusing to divorce her in a way that isn't considered to be a compelled get. An example are punishments that are known as harchakot of Rabbeinu Tam, which include not allowing a man who's refusing to divorce his wife to get an aliyah, join a minyan. You're not allowed to teach him Torah. You can't give his kids a bris. You can't bury his relatives in a Jewish cemetery. You can't really give him any kavod whatsoever that allows him to be part of a community. Those are punishments that are not understood to be compelling him to get a get, but are understood as, okay, if the consequence of this is that he gives his wife a get, then that's allowed. So these weren't implemented for many years, actually, but Rav Ovadia Yosef brought them back into popularity, and they were actually practically enforced in 2019 by the chief rabbi at the time, the chief Ashkenazi rabbi Rabbi David Lau, when it came to a get refuser who was trying to bury his mother in Eretz Yisrael, and they said that she can't be buried until he gives his wife a get in America. That's just it's an aside, but it's obviously very relevant to this topic at hand, which is a very complicated, heavy topic. And thank God there's organizations like Leora who are out there giving people halachic prenups to avoid all of these issues, and a lot of poskim who are working on this today. Let's now move down onward into the final Mishnah. Okay, so and we have only 20 minutes left, and that's okay. The final Mishnah, in which also the meat of what we'll be discussing today. So we have 3 opinions in this Mishnah. Would anyone like to read the Hebrew? I'm also, okay, so I can. Would anyone like to read the English? Okay, I can do that too.
I can read the Hebrew.
Okay, great. Oh, great. We got volunteers. Okay. Nathan, that'd be great. If you could go Beit Shammai translation, Beit Hillel translation, Rabbi Akiva translation.
Beit Shammai omrim lo yigaresh adam et ishto ela im kein matza ba dvar erva shne'amar ki matza ba ervat davar. Beit Shammai say a man may not divorce his wife unless he finds out about her having engaged in a matter of forbidden sexual intercourse, Dvar erva, she committed adultery or is suspected of doing so, as it is stated, because he has found some unseemly matter ervat davar in her, and he writes her a scroll of severance. Beit Hillel omrim afilu hikdicha tavshilo shne'amar ki matzava ervat davar. Beit Hillel says he may divorce her even due to a minor issue, e.g., because she burned or oversalted his dish, as it is stated, because he found some unseemly matter in her, meaning that he has found any type of shortcoming in her. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Afilu matzah acheret na'eh heimena, shneimar v'haya im lo timtza chen be'inav. Rabbi Akiva says, we divorce her even if he found another woman who is better looking than her and wishes to marry her, as it is stated in that verse. It comes to pass if she finds no favor in his eyes.
Okay, thank you very much. So what we see here is we are in our final Mishnah, we return to the pasuk in the Torah that actually from where we learn everything. And so it's fascinating that that the final Mishnah in our Masechet actually deals with, again, the meat of divorce and how we actually, what are grounds for divorce as opposed to all of the niche cases, or are they niche cases that we've been looking at, especially earlier on in the mishnayot. But so let's look at our pasuk here. So he kach ish isha u'ba'ala. So a man takes a wife and married her. Vaya im lo timtza chen be'einav ki matza ba ervat davar v'chatav l'sefer kritut v'natan be'adav shelcha bebeto. So if he does not find favor in his eyes because he found in her ervat davar, then he should write her a bill of divorce. So when we looked at the psukim originally, I said it's a question of how we actually translate these words of ervat davar, and that's exactly what comes up in the machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, where Nathan, the translation that you read, it says it still translates because he has found some unseemly matter, but we see that what the understanding is we're focusing basically when in the phrase ervat davar, which the word erva can be understood to be something unseemly, but it also refers to the arayot, prohibited sexual intercourse and nakedness. So ervat davar, when Beit Shammai is reading that, his emphasis is on the ervat. His emphasis is on that element, and he's saying you can only divorce your wife when she does not find favor in your eyes as a consequence of having found something that is related to her performing an act of forbidden sexual intercourse. Versus Beit Hillel, when they look at the phrase ervat davar, they focus on the davar, basically any matter that, and then ervat then becomes more about the focus is on the unseemliness. Any matter that is problematic to you within her, even if it's just burning your dinner one time, in that situation, that is legitimate grounds for a divorce. And then Rabbi Akiva goes a step further and he says, no, even you just see a woman on the street who's more beautiful than her, because he's focusing not on the words ervat davar, but on the words in the first words of the pasuk, v'hayat imlot, come before it, imlot timtza chen be'einav. If you do not, if she no longer finds favor in your eyes because you're now charmed by a different woman. And so we see, like, we start with Beit Shammai, more limiting, go to Beit Hillel, which is much more expansive, and then Rabbi Akiva, which is even more expensive. With Beit Hillel, it's that your wife does something wrong, but it's something very minor. It's not something that's halakhically problematic. It's just something that bothers you. With Rabbi Akiva, she doesn't even do anything wrong. You just find something that you like better. And obviously, this is one-sided language. I think it's just interesting to think of this as applying in terms of applying to relationships, how we think of relationships, how we think of wrongdoing, etc. I do want to look at the Gemara because I think that the Gemara is helpful in explaining how each of these Tanaim, how Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, and Rabbi Akiva, how they're all looking at the psukim differently beyond what we see. So let's delve into the Gemara a little bit. So and this is the final Gemara. Basically, what I have for the rest of the rest of class is the final Gemara in Masechet Gittin on this Mishnah, because I think it's fascinating. Why I think it's fascinating is that it begins with our Mishnah, which tells us the reasons for divorce, again, starting stricter and then getting more expansive. And then the Gemara takes a very ambivalent attitude towards divorce. Has anyone learned this Gemara before? Okay, great. So I'm excited for us to look at it together in these 15 minutes that we have left. And this is I think it's not a coincidence, meaning it's just as we look at the Mishnah as a text written with intention, we also should obviously look at the Gemara that way too, that the Gemara is trying to tell us something, both in terms of its like literal content that it's telling us, but also in terms of the structure. And I think the fact that this is the way that the Gemara ends off the entire long Masechet is very interesting. A note before we enter the Gemara, just in terms of the structure of the Mishnah that we saw, I don't have anything bigger to say about this, but I'm curious if anyone does, is that when I like looking at the Mishnah as a whole, looking at the Masechet as a whole, sorry, Masechet Gittin in the Mishnayot as a whole, it really seems to be written backwards. To me, I just get the vibe that this was written backwards, and obviously it wasn't, right? There's intention here, but we start off in the end talking about the grounds for divorce, and then earlier in the 9th parak, we talk about how the get should be phrased and how the get should be given and how the get should be written. And also in the 8th parak, where we are talking too about scenarios of how the get is written and given, and those are scenarios that seem to me at least a little bit less esoteric than the cases that we see in earlier in the Mishnah, which here we start off in the end of the Mishnah, the husband and wife seem to be in closer proximity to each other, and we don't have this notion of shlichim in the end of these emissaries. And as the Gemara, basically we start off in the Mishnah in the first parak, assuming that the husband is very far away, and then when we end the Masechet, it seems like the husband is nearby, and it seems like things are local, and I'm not sure what to do with that. It's like the Mishnah is starting with us being far apart and then coming to us being closer together in a sense, and I don't know what that means. But that's the impression that I got from looking at this Masechet overall. If anyone has any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear any thoughts on the overall structure of the Mishnah, anything that they were struck by, or how to make sense of it.
So I asked a relative of mine in Israel, because I was, like why. I discussed with him why Gittin comes before Ksuvos also. So he said to me that it's the same. He thought about it, and he thought that it was
Kedushin.
Before Kedushin. I'm sorry. So he said that it was the same idea that perhaps applies to that a haftorah never ends on a negative, and that a parsha never ends on a negative. That we sometimes, I think the biggest example I thought of was Parshat Shmot, that we have the first pasuk of Perek Vav in there, that, Hashem, Moshe complains to Hashem, why are you being so negative to me? And Hashem says, Achshav hachiloti larot lacha, et koach, et yadi, when I'm going to do all the makot and everything. And that's pasuk aleph and Perek Vav, as opposed to ending on all the negative. That you don't want to end on a negative, so you end the Masechta on a positive, on that there's, even after divorce or after Yevamos and everything, there's always the possibility of getting married, of starting over again.
And so therefore Kedushin is at the end. And then that also then explains, I guess, why we go from farther to closer. Again, closer, they're still getting divorced, but then that ends with Kedushin in the end. And I think actually I'm just gonna, are you now, which screen is everyone seeing? Did I switch?
Mishnah Gittin.
Yes, you're showing Mishnah Gittin.
Wonderful. That's what I intended. So if we look at the second to last Mishnah in the Masechet, we suddenly start talking about Kiddushin. Actually, it like pops up right before we then get into the meat of it, in terms of whether a woman is considered to be married or not, based on rumors flying in the city about her. So we have Mikudeshet. Then we go back to Migurashet, but it's like we're throwing in that Mikudeshet element also, and we're talking about betrothal. That's very interesting. So I guess that I think that relates to the Gemara that we'll see now. So we're not going to learn this whole thing. I have the whole thing here. We're gonna go in and out. So first of all, we just immediately go in with the Gemara quoting a Braita that tackles head on what is happening in the machloket between Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, and Rabbi Akiva. So it starts off with Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai sparring and saying, wait a second, Beit Hillel says to Beit Shammai, it says davar. It doesn't just say erva, it says davar. It seems to say any matter. And then Beit Shammai say, no, it says erva. How can you be ignoring that? We're specifically talking about some prohibited matter of prohibited sexual intercourse. And then basically them teasing out what this phrase means to each of them in order to understand how they to defend their position in terms of divorce. Rabbi Hillel says, if it were to say ervat and not say davar, then I would say that it's really about erva. But because it says that, but erva meaning prohibited sexual relationship, she actually cheats, then they should divorce. But because of just a small matter, they shouldn't divorce. But it says ervat davar. It says davar. That means that they can divorce for other matters too. And then Hillel then has to explain, okay, but why does it say ervat in the first place if the point is davar? The point is, he says, to teach us that mishum we might think that just for a matter, let's say burning his dish, then she could get married to someone else. But we might think that if it were erva, then she wouldn't be able to marry someone else. L'kach ne'emar ervat. This pasuk specifically tells us ervat davar in order to teach us that either way, whether you're divorcing her because of something small that she did or because of infidelity, either way she's able to marry another man. So therefore, he is explaining neatly why it says both ervat and davar. And Beit Shammai then has to say, okay, I would have been fine if it just said erva. Why does it say davar? And the answer is nemar kan davar v'nemar lahalan davar. But it says davar here, and so we're going to have a gzera shava. We have two psukim in two places that share the same word, and we're going to learn a halacha from one to another. So just as when it comes to matters of the Beit Din, that al pi shnayim edim o al pi shlosha edim yakum davar. We have this in this is in Parshat Shoftim. No, yes, Parshat Shoftim, I think. Yes, I'm not sure. But you basically need witnesses. So too, you need witnesses when it comes to divorce. So that's what Beit Shammai does with the word davar. And then they argue, but it should have said, then Beit Hillel says it should have said erva ba davar, and Beit Shammai says it should have said or erva or davar, and then they go back and forth. Seemingly we end with Beit Hillel's response to justify himself, which is that it says erva davar, meaning either way, either erva or davar. And then we get into Rabbi Akiva's opinion, which is that he can even find someone else who's better. And so then we say that the machloket between them rests on the understanding of what the word ki means. So in our pasuk, it says, if she does not find favor in his eyes because he found within her an unseemly matter, does ki mean because here or not? So I in this translation wrote because or, and that's exactly the machloket where Reish Lakish says that the word ki can mean four things. The word ki can mean it can mean if. It could mean Dilma, it could be perhaps, it could mean Ella, it could mean rather, it could also mean Daha, meaning because. And so Beit Shammai thinks that it means because. So Daha, it means because you're the reason that she doesn't find favor in your eyes is because you found in her this unseemly matter. Whereas Rabbi Akiva says it means or. So either you have this unseemly matter or this matter of infidelity, or she just doesn't find favor in your eyes. So that's how we explain the machloket rooted in the text between the three women machloket between Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, and Rabbi Akiva, where Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai have different understandings of what ervat davar is, but seemingly for both of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, ervat davar is the necessary component. You have to really look at that. And so they understand that he doesn't find favor in her eyes because she doesn't find favor in his eyes because he found in her this ervat davar, where Rabbi Akiva says either he found ervat davar or she doesn't find favor in his eyes for whatever reason, even if it just means that he found someone more beautiful than her. So let's skip down a little bit. We have comparing women to flies here, where we're basically acknowledging here, Rabbi Meir is saying in this Breita that there's different attitudes that people have towards women, where people have different attitudes towards food as they do towards women, and he compares a scenario in which a man is very overly protective of his wife, which is when a fly flies into your cup and then you throw everything out and you don't even drink it. And then you have people who are more permissive, where if a fly flies into their cup, they they take out the fly, but they do drink what was in the cup. And that's what is the typical midah of man, and the nimshal of that, what that is referring to when it comes to women, is women who talk to their male family members. And then you have a situation where you have a fly that falls into the tamchui, flies into a serving bowl, and he sucks out the fly and eats the food. And that's considered to be something gross. And this is the midah of a bad man who allows his wife to go out doing all sorts of things with her head is uncovered, and she spins in the marketplace, which presumably would allow parts of her body to show. As she does that, you can see her body, and also is rochatzet in bnei adam, or she washes in a place where other people can see her. What's interesting is that these are examples that a woman is of a woman violating dat Yehudit in Masechet Ketubot, which would make her be divorced without a ketubah. What's also interesting is that according to the Yerushalmi, so just if we're in terms of thinking about different grounds for divorce here, according to Rabbi Meir, if a woman does this, if a woman is going out doing all these things, then she should be divorced. Our Mishnah also tells us that. And according to Talmud Yerushalmi, this is part of Beit Shammai's opinion as well, which is confusing because really it seems like what we're talking about in the Mishnah is cases of a man voluntarily divorcing his wife, or divorcing his wife from his initiative. But his initiative, if she has fully committed adultery, isn't really his initiative because he has to divorce her. So something interesting is going on there too, because there are other cases where a husband needs to divorce his wife, which we mentioned earlier, such as if he works in certain things, or if she which make him intolerable to be around, for example, or if she's unable to have children, etc. But sorry, I just got a little lost in the sauce. Let's get back to where we were. So now we say that no, we're gonna okay. So sorry, I should have put this down earlier. We have this, so these three words here, I meant to attach it to the next part. Basically, we've been talking about divorce. We've been talking about how divorce is an okay thing to do. We've been talking about how divorce is a legitimate thing to do. It's also something that I brought up, at least in the reading of not Rabbi David Brodsky, but Dr. David Brodsky, two different people. Dr. David Brodsky's article that I brought in the first week, which is that the whole notion of tikkun olam being brought in here is in order, in the middle of our Masechet, is in order to really emphasize the point that sometimes it happens that things don't work out and you need to reevaluate and separate, and that divorce isn't seen as this bad thing. And now the Gemara is going to show some ambivalence about that. The Gemara quotes Malachi, which says, Hi saneh shalach, which the question is, how do we understand these words? It seems to be for the translation is because I so Malachi was rebuking those who divorced his wives, and in quoting Hashem is saying, Hi saneh shalach, I hate those who send away. But Rabbi Yehuda says that when it says Hi saneh shalach, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, im saneta shalach. If you hate your wife, then you should divorce her. So you should send her away. So rather than saying for I, again, and this is how we translate the word ki again, rather than the pasuk being for I hate those who are shalach, those who are sending away their wives, it's he means if hi saneh, in a situation where you hate, then you should send away. Rabbi Yochanan, however, says that no, and this is the shot of the pasuk, that sanui hameshalech, the person who sends away their wife, the person who divorces his wife, is considered to be hated. And now we say la pliye habazug rishon habazug sheni. Suddenly, we arrive at this distinction between first marriages and second marriages. That first marriages you shouldn't be quick to divorce, but the second marriage, if you have reasons to divorce, if there's hatred, or if the husband despises his wife, then he should divorce her. And then we have a statement to support this. Da'amar Rabbi Elazar, kol megarish ishto rishona, afilu mizbeach murid alav t'ba'ot. Rabbi Elazar says that anyone who divorces his first wife, the mizbeach cries for him, the altar cries for him, and we're quoting Malachi again here. in order to prove that. And that's the note that our Masechet ends on. So we have the quote, Vazot shenit ta'asu ksot dam'at mizbeach Hashem b'chi v'anaka me'ein od pnot el hamincha v'lakachat ratzon miyadechem. V'amartem alma al ki Hashem he'id beincha uvein eshet neurecha asher ata begataba v'hi chavratcha v'eshet britecha. That the Mizbeach is really crying because you have dealt treacherously with your first wife, who was your companion. And on that note, the Masechet ends. We end right there. And so it's just fascinating, I think, that leading into Kiddushin, we're getting back to this point of really emphasizing the union between husband and wife, and not emphasizing the kirva, emphasizing the value of the closeness, and again, like fully going even farther with how our Masechet sort of goes from distance to coming closer. Again, not coming closer to be married, but still coming closer in proximity. Now we're going even further and saying that they shouldn't, it's the relationship shouldn't even end in the first place. But another thing that's interesting here is that our Mishnah is telling us that you can even get to, Rabbi Kiva's opinion is you can even get divorced if you just find someone who's a little bit more beautiful than your wife. And here, where we end the Masechet quoting Rabbi Elazar saying, no, don't do it, basically, like value your relationship, value what we have. And I'm not like trying to make any larger point about whether people should get divorced or shouldn't get divorced. It is none of my business. And I think often divorce is the biggest blessing for people who are in bad marriages. And like, of course, I do think it's very interesting that the Gemara is expressing this ambivalence and also then trying to resolve everything by saying, okay, one, we have the first marriage and then versus the second marriage. And that's how we sort of resolve this tension that we have between, on the one hand, being okay with divorce and perhaps even being very, very okay with divorce versus being not okay with divorce. And so the Gemara says, okay, we're talking about two different scenarios. And in fact, this is how there's different ways of basically understanding how this machloket, sorry, I'm scrolling up, how this three-way machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel and Rabbi Akiva, how does this graft on to first marriage versus second marriage? Yes, Nathan.
Are you going to tie into the second to last Mishnah? I felt like I thought that was, you brought about like the rumor, and I was a little confused when we.
Oh yeah, I did briefly bring that up. I'll relate to that in a minute. Is that okay? In a couple of minutes, I'll end with that. Why not? So, and don't worry, Kayla, I will do this in a minute and I'll do that in a minute and then I'll let everyone go. Sorry, I just got on late today because of my technical issues, which thank God we've held up, which I'm very happy about. But there's a whole machloket of understanding, okay, we have these three opinions in the Mishnah, then we suddenly have this opinion in the Gemara that there's a difference between first marriages and second marriages. What do we do with that? And so one way of looking at it, and this might be the shot way of looking at it, and this is in the eyes of these three different ways of looking at this is within Rav Aaron Lichtenstein's Zatzal's understanding of how to understand the Mishnah compared to the Gemara, is that we can see that there's no connection between them, basically. Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, and Rabbi Akiva are talking about the halakha dimension in terms of what's actually mutter and aser. And when the Gemara is telling us about first marriage, second marriage, that's just their own, that's some like preaching of values and morality. The second understanding is that this whole machloket between Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, and Rabbi Akiva is only talking about second marriage. So where Rabbi Akiva is very permissive about second marriage, which seems to be, and Beit Hillel, which seems to be in accordance with what the Gemara is saying, whereas Beit Shammai says, no, even in that situation, you should still hold on to that second marriage. But when it comes to first marriage, everyone is machmir like Beit Shammai. And then a third way of understanding it is that this machloket is actually with regard to the first marriage, that in the second marriage, everyone agrees that you don't really need a serious rationale to get divorced. But within the first marriage, that's where we have this machloket. What's interesting is that the Rambam does poskin this difference between first and second marriage, and seems to even poskin like Beit Shammai. But generally we hold like Beit Hillel when it comes to this issue as well. So I just want to, again, when we're ending our study together, we can see something very, I think what I'm presenting here is, on the one hand, we have something that, and then I'll go back to this Mishnah also, our eighth our ninth Mishnah, sorry, the ninth Mishnah, is on the one hand, and I will really wrap up very shortly. What we have on the one hand is something that seems like we're able to understand the Mishnah as this structured, coherent text that has meaning. It has meaning both in the way it begins with something that's very far away, and then in the end with things that are coming closer and also approaching the real reasons for divorce, the real meat of the matter. And in the middle, we have this whole notion of tikkun olam, and that's really meant to tell us the thesis of the Masechet, so to speak, is that sometimes things need to be renegotiated and changed, and that's okay, and that's good, and there's purpose to it. And then with only the small part of the Gemara that we looked at, we see that whole coherent message gets a little bit messy, and things get a little bit there's ambivalence, and there's a little bit of doubt as to what is this. What is the topic that at hand here? What is this whole notion of divorce that we're talking about? And we're ending on this note of, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? How do we think about this? And like that there's a bit of when I learn the end of the Gemara here, I feel angst. I feel angst in the structure. And so I guess that is to say that nothing is necessarily the most neat. In our Masorah, we can maybe start off with something that seems neat and packaged and coherent in a whole, and then as layers and layers and layers get added onto it, sometimes things get clarified, but sometimes things also get messier, and different notions and different conceptions come into play here too. And it's all part of like the absolutely fascinating body of text that is not just a text, but is the foundation of our entire lives. That there isn't one voice in it, and there isn't one opinion in it, and it's something that is in flux in that sense, and is also something that is just riddled with questions and riddled with multiple answers. And I think when we learn the Masechet and the Mishnah, and then we look a little bit at the Gemara, we very much see that. And I just want to return to the second to last Mishnah, where what the second to last Mishnah discusses is the scenario in terms of, okay, where we're talking about not someone actually having like testimony that they got married or divorced, but a scenario in which there's rumors going about that the woman is either divorced or married. So we start off as saying it's Ashma Be'ir Mekudeshet. If people are talking and saying she's married, then she's considered to be married. Okay. And what I had said is that this is already sort of almost leading us into the topic of Kedushin, which comes next. That we're starting to talk about marriage at the second to last Mishnah of our Masechet of Gittin. And then the same thing applies with if people say that she's divorced, then she's divorced. Ubivat shelo yehesham amatla, as long as there isn't any explanation provided. So for example, oh, she's divorced, but it wasn't a fully legit get, or he threw her the money for her divorce, or the money for her to get married, assuming she's getting married through kesef, or the star, the document for her to get married, but we weren't sure whether it was closer to him or closer to her, and so we can't always rely on the voices saying that she's married or divorced if there's other mitigating factors at play. But again, we're introducing this notion of, we're introducing Kiddushin, where we're having a little te'ima, a little taste of Kiddushin, right as we end on the note of, okay, what is actually the legitimate grounds of divorce in the 10th Mishnah? And then we return to Kiddushin in the next Masechet, and thereby by doing so we also return to it's in the next pasuk, but V'shilcham beito, and the continuation of the next pasuk is Vaitali ishacher. She then gets married again. There is new life. There is something new that happens, and that's where we pick up. We pick up from where we left off, with not this ending, but actually a new beginning. And so just as doing our learning is cyclical, which is such a beautiful thing that we're in this like perpetual book club, so many different book clubs, overlapping book clubs. May we also, as we're finishing one Masechet, we should have we should feel renewed as we start the next one, as you guys start Kiddushin. I'll be learning too, and I'm very excited. I'm excited for you all to be able to learn with Kayla. Who's teaching the next series again?
Hold on. Let me just stop the share screen first, just so we can.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
So thank you. The next class in this series is on Kiddushin with Dr. Hanan Gafni starting next week.
Amazing. So I greatly enjoyed the opportunity to learn Gittin with all of you. I hope through your learning and through these shiurim, we're coming away with just better grasp on the material and also insights in terms of structure and in terms of content. I really enjoyed this. Thank you, Kayla, for all your help, both before the meetings and during them in terms of technical difficulties, making everything run smoothly. Thank you, everyone, for your participation, both reading and comments. And yeah, we will
Your
return to
question?
Masechet Gittin. Yeah.
Why would they say that a second divorce is less consequential or could be more easy than the first divorce? Why would they have a different standard?
I think that's a really good question. And it seems to be, they just base it off of a very simply, very conveniently, I think, in the sense of not having to get into, this is a convenient answer that I'm giving at least, is that it's just tied into a pasuk that talks about the wife of your youth. And that's understood to be the first wife. And so Malachi is talking about Eshet Neoraich, about the wife of your youth. And so it seems to be taken more seriously there. Yeah, Nathan? You have an answer?
Say that Malachi is talking about the wife of your youth, as in these are returnees to Yehuda, and they've taken on a additional wife, and they've abandoned their wife from their youth, and the wife might even be not Yehudiya, and so
yes.
I
So
don't
that's
want
what
to say
context
that
of the
that's
Pesukim, right? So
yeah,
that's the
what the
context of the
pasuk is
Pesukim.
talking about.
And then extrapolated from that is this greater notion. What I kind of am arguing, and I'm not sure about this argument, is that just saying, okay, first marriage versus second marriage is a way to resolve the dissonance that exists around this enterprise of divorce. So we just say, okay, one here, one here. I don't think that's the best answer. I'm sure there's a better answer. I'm not sure what it is.
Thank you. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you all. And yeah, it's been a complete and absolute pleasure learning with all of you. And yeah, let's keep going. We'll keep learning, keep it up. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And if you'd like to keep learning more Mishnah with Drisha, with our series continuing next week, you can sign up at drisha.org/classes. Thank you for staying the extra 10 minutes, and take care.
Thank you, everyone.